Reached the top of the hour. I'd like to introduce everyone to the webinar, which is our annual blockbuster start of the year, which is 10 predictions for 2019. And I'd like to introduce to you our two speakers. First of all, I'd like to introduce Martin Hill-Wilson from Brain Food Consulting. Martin is well known to you on these webinars, and in fact, we did a webinar. We've been doing this now for the last 5 years, and I had a look back at the predictions that Martin made in 2014, and some of those which were, absolutely spot on. Customer service is now mobile, which was one, Martin, that you predicted at the time. And customers as advisors, I think that's starting to take up, providing customer or supporting forums for giving customer support. And certainly things such as social customer service, which I think 5 years ago was a brand new concept. So we're just hoping that Martin has still got his finger on the pulse as ever, and when we come back in another 5 years' time, we'll be able to get that same sort of track record. So also delighted to introduce to you Phil Davitt. Hi, Phil.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Phil Davitt from New Voice Media. This is your first webinar with us, and Phil, you were saying that you actually attended as a viewer our 2014 session then.
Yes, so it's my first time on this side of the microphone, but definitely not the first time that I've seen Martin in action with his predictions.
Wonderful. So just a bit of housekeeping. If you want to watch a replay of today's webinar, that will be available. I know a lot of you like to share these with your team and also with your management teams. That will be available from about 2:30 this afternoon. If you're not already logged into our chat room, and a lot of people are already logged in, here is the link, callcenterhelper.com/chat. It is in a separate window, so you just need to have the webinar on one side, the slides up on the other. And there's an added advantage of being logged into the chat room, as well as being able to chat with other people and asking questions, is that you can download the webinar slides. And we've got an additional reason for being in the chat room, is that you can put in your predictions, your questions, and your tip. We have a very nice, this is our brand new 2019 series of champagne we're sending out, a bottle of Taittinger champagne, or indeed, if you prefer, a box of chocolates or an Amazon gift card. We'll be picking that live. So we'll be looking at your best tips or your best predictions. So if you just like to use hashtag prediction for prediction or hashtag question for a question. And again, the link for that is at callcenterhelper.com/chat. Just need to put that into a separate browser. So we're going to kick off now with a poll, and we're going to ask, what was your fastest growing channel for last year? So we'll just put the poll up on the screen. What was your fastest growing channel last year? Was it voice? Was it email? Was it social? Was it live chat? Or was it SMS or messaging, something like Messenger or live chat? So just like to vote on that. Martin, any thoughts? What would be you think was the fastest growing?
If I had to pick one of them, I suspect chat is probably for many people being the fastest growing.
Okay, well, let's have a look at the results coming through. So just going to share the results here. Sample size of 162. It's got a lot of people logged in today. And 34% say it is chat. Quite interesting, 22% of people are saying that voice was the fastest growing channel last year. Phil, that's I know that New Voice Media often say, don't forget voice in all of the excitement around digital.
Absolutely. Voice is still an exceptionally important channel. I am surprised, I guess, that it's growing or the fastest growing for such a number, because of course it's already the strongest channel. But it does go to show that voice is still maintaining that position as not necessarily the first place that people go, but still one of the preferred channels.
Indeed. So some quite interesting findings there.
Interesting.
Well, let's dive straight in, and let's ask Martin if he would like to share with us his predictions. Rachel, if we can just change the change across to Martin.
Very good. Right. Let's just go across to there. Let's go across there. Out to here. Okay. Is that visible now? Jolly good.
It's come through.
It is indeed.
Good. All right. Well, hello everybody. Let's go through this together, and really looking at the kind of things that people have been saying in the chat room in terms of your own priorities. I think it mashes in very nicely with what I want to talk about, and it gives me a chance also to make some points, I think, on some of the points of focus that people have got, particularly, you know, this general trend towards trying to build and develop self-service. I'm going to encourage you, whilst that's going to be an objective, to also have a context around that and think about how it fits into a broader contact mix, and how, again, you're going to be moving between self-service and live, because unless you've got some of those parameters work, you're going to find that the self-service is going to be less than satisfactory from customers' perspective. So that's a message that I'm going to repeat a number of times. But picking maybe the biggest prediction for the year, it's not one that started literally January 1st. We saw quite a lot of activity, you know, building steam in the last 18 months. And I guess if we have this in 5 years' time, it will still be within the top 10. The impact that AI technologies is having, obviously not just in our space, but across organizations. But it is interesting that within contact centers, it is now becoming threaded across everyday contact. Starting first and foremost, though, with an area that we're all pretty familiar with, which is whether or not we call them chatbots, or we call them virtual assistants or whatever, and whether or not we experience them as text-based, or we are increasingly familiar with the voice versions. For example, yesterday I was listening to some people talking on Twitter just before going to the Alexa conference, and apparently the new vocabulary is now not wearables but voiceables, which is interesting. And there's clearly a huge push to bring the voice interface in as a major alternative, really, which is cool from the omni-channel perspective, you know, whichever modality works, whether it's going to be text or whether it's going to be voice. But collectively, between people like Google, Alexa, I noticed yesterday that Baidu, or I think WeChat, has now also launched its own version. So everybody's getting their act together around that. If you look on the left-hand side of the page, you know, some of people have focused on the avatar experience. That lady at the top there comes out of a really cool brand from New Zealand called Soul Machines, which is interesting. And they go for hyper-realistic versions of automation and the human experience, you know. And again, if you go and look at the test case there with her, you know, she's pretty realistic in terms of her ability to emote and all the rest of the good stuff. And on the very far left there, you've got things like Margot, which was Lidl, you know, it's a great little thing on the wine bot. Sephora does some good stuff, etc., etc. And I think the basic point that I'd like to make is that these have definitely arrived on the scene. They're in our consciousness, and they're going to go nowhere but onwards and upwards. So they're going to become more sophisticated in terms of what we're using them for. The underlying tech is going to continue to mature. Not many of them have got a great deal of AI in them right now, to be honest, but they're increasingly going to become more able to predict and anticipate. They are going to be better managed in terms of it's still human in the loop type of knowledge management that's needed to drive them, you know, from the back end. And customers themselves are becoming increasingly used to engaging with them. So I think that's in a healthy space. UK, by the way, interestingly, we are behind the curve. If you look at how adoption in other spaces, even in Europe, North America, Southeast Asia, there's many more examples than happening right here now, unfortunately. So we need to get our skates on as far as that's concerned. But this is a healthy part of the market, which is increasingly going to go AI. But I do think it's important to not just say, oh, AI equals chatbots. It's a much broader proposition now. And this is a very, very quick sort of skate through a broader discussion that I have got myself involved in, which is to say, where else do we see? And I suppose the headline is more important than anything else, which is from working harder, which has always been our ethic, unfortunately, to increasingly, hopefully, working smarter. And I think that's the contribution that AI is going to give us. And it starts right at the beginning with the ability to get smarter about understanding the intent, the requirement the customer's got, and making a better job at putting the right resource in front of them. Now, that could just be an advisor, it could be a modality, text, voice, video, it could be the choice of saying we don't need a live human being for that kind of requirement, let's push people through to self-service. Some people might even be smart enough to actually understand the pattern of something and go, hey, do you know what, that should be a proactive push the next time round. But I've certainly seen many people start to describe the ability to spot patterns, to understand intent, to link that with whatever we might know historically about customers through CRM, and increase the degree to which we get right first time. That's a big area for growth. You've then got interesting areas. Again, most advisors within the next, half dozen years should have some form of experience of help in the form of virtual assistants, and indeed most of us in our work life as AI becomes more pervasive. This is AI in the form of a virtual assistant that will help us auto-complete stuff, find stuff, proactively suggest stuff. And again, in our marketplace, that will help with standardization, that will help particularly onboard new people, it will help for the quality assurance function to get more consistency of service. So that's an interesting thing. Not out there in many instances yet, but you can see some examples. Task automation, RPA, all of that has been incredibly popular. And again, at the end of calls, we should start to see some of the tagging capabilities introduced into that completion process, which is going to do nothing but help rediscover information and also understand trends and activities as a result of that. So interesting stuff as far as the live is concerned. Self-serve, we know about that. I'm going to talk more about this later on in terms of the escalation stuff, but a lot of us are still building what we call the intent libraries. In other words, trying to understand within a given area, I don't know, like onboarding, complaints, all the different ways in which illusion is created, if you want, that we're able to engage with a self-service capability. And then the curation of that, how that gets done, etc., etc. Area I mentioned earlier on, I think there's huge opportunity to be able to look at customer journeys and said, why do people keep talking to us at a given point in time? If we can spot that pattern of behavior through machine learning, can't we push that stuff out and therefore reduce our inbound? I think that's a smart thing to do. Getting smarter, I think that AI will also help us surface a lot of the trend analysis that currently remains invisible. I mean, I think one of the most interesting things about our space, and Phil, we were talking about this earlier on, is of all the operational data we generate, what % do we have control over and visibility? And the answer is still very, very low, isn't it?
Almost nothing.
Almost nothing is the real answer.
And there's so much data being produced in contact centers that could be valuable.
Yeah.
And as you say, they're eliminating no value contacts. You can use systems that we've got today to predict if someone's calling you straight after a bill has been produced.
Guess what?
You might know why they're calling.
Yeah.
You might be able to provide that information automatically and not necessarily deflect it, but actually solve that before it gets to a real person.
Yes, yes, and it absolutely matches our expectation as consumers, which is minimum effort,
yes,
and please know what I want when I want it.
But it doesn't necessarily say you're steering me to a self-service. I might be going through the channel of choice, but receiving a self-service reply from that, I can still carry on through and get hold of somebody if I need to.
Yeah, which is why the two-way escalation thing is so important.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come back to that. I also think that it's an opportunity to rebuild journeys. There's a lot of work being done within pure digital transformation, trying to keep journeys within the digital domain, keep the documentation, keep the digital signatures, all of that kind of good stuff. And we're beginning to see examples in certain industries where it might have taken 2 or 3 weeks to have got a job done because you've got to post and all that stuff. Now it's happening in literally a matter of minutes. And AI has certainly got a role to play within that sort of transformation of journeys. That's the front end, if you want, the bit that the customer sees. Then, but there's a ton of stuff happening in management as well. We're not that far away, and certainly we're going to start to see virtual assistants being part and parcel of learning development. Why don't we have that in our zone as a coaching contribution? We will certainly see a much more sophisticated level of dashboards at advisor level, team leader level, site level, simply because we can spot those and almost reproduce those in real time now. That's starting to become much more possible. I think recruitment and development, this is stuff I have seen in associated markets, not necessarily within ours, but it's just a matter of time before the vendors bring this to us. The business, for example, of evaluating CVs when you have many, and this will apply to some people in the audience, you can do that in an automated way now. You can also do that with the benefits of, for example, recommending candidates in a non-biased way. That's one of the most interesting things that's possible. You can have personalized learning as a result of, again, that kind of understanding my needs, proactively pushing, probably using, again, a virtual assistant coach approach to life. And then richness in the analytics and the insight function. I've already seen examples of AI machine learning being used to dynamically adapt scheduling for the whole planning process. That's a big ask that we've had for years, actually, and suddenly will push, I think, us much closer to an accurate view of what's going on. Analytics is all getting turbocharged, whether or not it's text or speech, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, overall, I love the fact that this is the first prediction, because AI is such a buzz. It has been, and this is potentially the year where it really starts hitting that mainstream. You know, last couple of years through consumers, the Googles, the Alexas. I have some Alexas. Yep. I love using them for those very, very simple interactions. But when that starts reaching customer experience and customer service, you know, that's where it's going to really be transformational.
Yes.
People tend to think when you talk about AI as just bots on the front end.
Yeah.
You know, the whole stream of stuff that you've kind of covered here shows that it's so much deeper than that.
Yes.
And when you get to those cognitive analytics, barely any conversation happens at the moment here with prospects or customers where they don't want to talk about that. And whenever we bring it up, it's such an exciting part of the conversation.
There's a wow factor, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
From small startups through to enterprise organizations, that is something that they can see immediate return on investments for.
So really my message on this slide is to say, please don't think that it's about one thing only. Please don't leap at the first vendor that knocks on your front door and says, hey, we're now AI enabled. This needs a plan, because actually you're going to be reinventing the whole damn thing. So make sure you get your priorities in place and don't get choked in terms of delivery of that value, because you just don't have the change management capacity. So make sure you've got a strategic prioritization of that stuff. That's my message on there. Let's move on. Flowing through, this is one that's been around for a while now, but I'm just going to up the ante in terms of what I want to say about it. And that is that you've got to get your act together around the fact that people want to engage in different ways: text, voice, video, to a growing extent. That requires deliberate design. Otherwise, you are not going to deliver something that works from a CX point of view, and you're just going to incur additional cost. So, summarizing that, some of you will have seen this material before. We are on a journey from one that is primarily still live-based, primarily rooted in voice, with a bit of self-service, a bit of proactive, to getting rebalanced. What that future looks like, nobody knows. I personally think that if you define the value of a live engagement around of when it's emotional, when it's complex, when it's about the relationship, which is my particular definition, you ought in a future state to have that reduced to about a quarter of all inbound, is my personal perspective. That said, you will be moving between self-service and proactive and assisted service, again, in a seamless way. All right, and that's an incredibly important point to make. You've got some indication of some of the market leaders. Jason's been doing this for a while with Dixon's, and again, talking to other people, they seem to be, if you're intending to remove low-hanging fruit, in other words, to my mind, misusing people because they're just doing very simple information-based stuff, you can chunk out about 10% of that per annum, generally to self-serve.
And there's some talk, I've seen it on the chat here that's coming through, and people are talking about just that the assisted service, so the self-service, the bots, the AIs are there to be used for removing those simple automated tasks, whether it's back office tasks or customer requests. So your diagrams here are obviously more about contact volume.
Yeah.
Maybe not actually the amount of time that we're spending on these, because the large proportion of self-service is short, sharp, done.
Yes.
That means your assisted service can now talk about, really kind of building that emotional connection with the customer.
It becomes the valued stuff and the much longer stuff.
Yes.
At the end of the day. And it reprofiles people, which is why we're going to talk about emotion a little bit later on. But it's all to do with actually fulfilling what the CX strategy is demanding of the contact center. The other thing to be said is, and this is a piece of research that actually the call center helper did last year, what are some of the new channels that are coming through? They tend to be at this point in time mainly live, sort of text-based. We can see that. Here's another version of that, and I just want to make the point that if any of you are sitting around thinking that you're going to get rid of old channels and just have new channels, I'd like to really persuade you to drop that idea as being a redundant one. The fact is, my mantra is they multiply, they seldom die. If you thought you're done with SMS, guess what? There's another one in town called RCS. If you want the detail, that's the telcos, that's Google pushing a new thing in there. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. You'll have people knocking on your front door this year saying, do you want some of that? So we're just going to see a continuous parade of new channels, all of which says, what are my design principles? What am I trying to do here? So again, back to those of you that said earlier on, we are doing self-service. Do it, please, in a context that is broader than that, because otherwise you'll never get to your desired outcome. You'll still be frustrated that other things keep turning up as far as the customer choice is concerned.
We asked them earlier the question about what's the growing channels.
Yeah.
And you can see voice is still growing.
It's still there, absolutely.
It's not just holding steady, but it is growing.
Yes.
For some people.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wonder if you'd have asked that question in the 2014, not necessarily which is growing, but who's using more than voice?
Well, what we should really be asking now is actually, of the growth in voice and live channels, how many times are we using people to their best advantage?
Yeah.
That's the real next question to be asked, yeah? And the stuff that is low-hanging fruit and low value, we should be making sure we get rid of that so we can really concentrate on the customer experience.
Great question.
That's the next thing. So part of this, flowing into the next part of the conversation, is to say you've got to have something that joins up the dots there, not just the channels. You've got to have stuff that connects those choices with the data, with the workflow, call it what you want, unified ecosystem or whatever. And again, a little bit disappointing in terms of some of the feedback that Jonty and his team uncovered this year, which is that some of us recognize that and that we have got an integrated approach, but we've still got a significant number of people who aren't really biting the bullet there. And as choice gets built into the way we engage with customers, I said earlier on that voiceables are coming over the horizon. Where's that going to fit in? It's not going to stop. So you've got to have a reduction of complexity in terms of also accommodating this new set of choices. And again, you've got to be thinking about integration and the generation of architecture that you need for that. And in particular, I'll give you a couple of things that I think this year will become more and more important. It may appear at first blush that it is getting rid of the human and giving it to a virtual assistant or a FAQ or something like that. But either because of situation, the propensity of the customer, you just don't know. You're going to have to be flowing between virtual to human. And by the way, the other way around as well. So you need to be designing journeys where the choice is very easy to orchestrate between those two things. And if you again go up a level to what impact does AI have on the planet, you'll find that people like McKinsey are saying that it's not displacing jobs, it's more that certain tasks within jobs will get taken by AI, and this is our version. Yeah. So in the future, one of the things that matters, and I'm going to talk about service design in a bit, is you're probably going to find on most of your journeys is a little bit of automation and a little bit of live. And the ability to move seamlessly and easily without forgetting what we've talked about, et cetera, is absolutely going to be the thing that makes the difference. Otherwise, you're going to find you're going down a self-service cul-de-sac, customers won't adopt it, and you're back into live unnecessarily.
So that seamlessness between automation and live is the same problem that we've been looking at in the industry for moving between different channels. Whether it's I'm on live chat and now I'm going to speak to somebody on the phone, movement between those two channels seamlessly has been something that people have been trying to get to grips with probably since we've been doing these predictions. And so it's the same problem.
Yeah.
And it's something that hopefully means that we can just take the learnings from that previous model and start inputting them into this, and that we've got people out there in the ecosystem that are already thinking about it.
So one of my requests to those of you focused on self-service, can you please include escalation as part of the design brief?
Yes.
Yeah. That would be the thing to say. And then the other thing, it's an old chestnut, but again, complexity at the desktop, that needs to get dealt with even more so in today's world, so people can focus upon the experience, not the complexities of the desktop. So there you go, there's our top 3 to begin with. We've got 10, but it's probably time for you to do a little bit of communicating and talking. So, Stonti, would you like to take over and invite folk to contribute some of their own ideas, please?
Well, let's have a look at some of the top tips and stuff coming back from the audience. So what we see is that James said contact centers will become more invested in agent engagement to ultimately improve customer service. Quite an interesting prediction.
Yep.
Quite
Agreed.
an interesting prediction there. Scott has said as automation through self-service and AI continues to become more popular by contact centers, we'll see customers choose voice channels to ensure they're speaking to an individual. So I think that's quite an interesting one of the human touch behind the self-service rather than a sort of a digital touch.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately that will get balanced out. If you've got live web, you've also got chatbots embedded there. You're probably going to have the equivalent on the voice channel, to be honest with you. You'll have an Alexa-style automated voice and then a real live voice. There is a debate, by the way, at the moment, which Google Duplex kicked off end of last year, which is, do I know whether or not I'm speaking to a live person or a simulation of that? And again, California has taken the view that you've got to promote quite consciously the fact that you're not speaking to a real human being, so people don't feel conned and fooled by that.
It's the Turing test, and people, we're seeing it with bots now. Chatbots specifically will introduce themselves. Hi, my name is, I'm a chatbot.
Yes, that's right.
And it makes that point because otherwise people feel a little bit uneasy. We can tell things sometimes don't quite feel like a real person.
Yes.
And if you're trying to pretend it's a real person, customers don't like that.
No, they don't. No, that's right.
And here's an interesting one from Carlos. It says companies will start to use chat or SMS to place orders or submit information without having to be online. So that's quite an interesting one of using web chat for ordering rather than actually having to follow a form, which I think
yeah, that could be good.
That could eventually come through. Elisa says here's a prediction: voice activated app configuration. So presumably that's changing settings on apps. Jamie said call handling time will continue to increase as agents become super agents. That's certainly something I've seen a lot. Dealing with complex calls as easy mundane inquiries are handled by self-service. I think that's certainly quite true.
That's a fascinating.
Josh has asked a question. How do you see the balance of AI adoption between smaller businesses and larger multinationals? Do you think the smaller players will be crowded out as presumably the bigger ones can afford the cost of the AI?
Well, I think there's two sides to that. For me, the vendors themselves, there's certainly small fish are getting eaten by the bigger fish very quickly. It is difficult for some of those smaller players to remain independent, and I think that is a genuine issue with the marketplace at the moment. In terms of availability and the democratization of AI, I think you're going to find that solutions will quickly spread to fit all types and all sizes and all needs. So I don't think necessarily that just the big will benefit. I think more than anything else, we're still at the point where mindset matters more than anything, to really be rigorous about saying where our AI changes the way we do business. Journalists are doing a lot of that at the moment, making sure they're not in a dead industry, for example. So they've had to taste the Kool-Aid on that one. So I think at the moment, everybody can benefit. There's nothing, it's not a price prohibitive solution set, in other words.
I would say cloud has made a huge difference to that, right? Because years ago, if we'd have been doing this same sort of revolution, it would have all been about paying for huge stacks of technology on site. But now that cloud is really out there and kind of considered absolutely the norm and the first place to go
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
These sorts of things are available to large-scale businesses as well as much smaller companies. And actually, the smaller companies become the more nimble and agile ones that can adopt this sort of tech very quickly, compared to large organizations who might have very long processes to get something like this into their organization. So I think actually the smaller companies are likely to be able to take advantage of this much quicker.
So here's a question for Martin and for Phil. What do you think is likely to have the biggest growth? Artificial intelligence spoken, voice artificial intelligence, or written?
All right, well,
Leaf, Martin, what's your take?
Add up and tell me, of all human communication, how much is voice and how much is written? And that would be my answer, quite seriously, because I don't know what it is, but they're both useful for humans. And I think AI versions of both will grow as a result of that.
So Phil, what's your take on this one?
We talked earlier about the fact that actually AI is not just about the bots at the front end. It's not just about the customer interaction, but it's personalized dashboards for agents. It's CV scanning. And when we talked about cognitive analytics, we very specifically kind of steered away from saying speech analytics, because actually it's full-on conversation analytics. It's both being able to analyze emails, web chats, as well as the speech conversations that are happening. So I think that actually the growth of spoken AI will be brought along with the growth of written AI, but it will be part of it. So the primary piece is going to be the written.
By the way,
and it's quite interesting, because I think if you look at, there's two types of artificial intelligence, one which is a bunch of what-if statements, and the other is machine learning neural networks. Actually, speech analytics is very, very heavy user of neural networks. So it's probably, if you're using, you may not even be aware that if you're using speech analytics, you've got a lot of AI in there already. Right, Martin, I think now's probably the time to jump across your next predictions.
Okay, cool. Right, let's move on. Yes, so still on the theme really of sort of a whole new way of building things. There's an emerging thing around of what the art of the possible is becoming. It's a bit of a loose way of putting it, but let's look at it like this. As the world is getting more complicated, I think there's a growing realization that you don't want to be stuck with only one version of things. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to iterate. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to respond to customer needs, competitive needs, etc. There is a newest trend with a certain generation of technology, which is like Lego and reducing it down to smaller bit parts, if you want. Service components. Each of those components can be programmed and orientated to do different things according to the requirement. So that's one part to create inherent flexibility to build. There is then two vitally important things that sort of turbo boost it. The AI stuff that we've discussed, which certainly imbues it with a certain degree of intelligence and capability, and then the ability to join those bits together, either amongst themselves or to other bits that you have in other parts of the organization. And most of the audience is going to appreciate the difference between API and previous generations of plugging things together. And the great facilitation of all of that is the cloud, which, apart from enabling those things to take place, also enables these things to happen at scale and also to be able to happen at any point of presence. And the prediction that I think is worth thinking about here is whether or not you're looking at individual vendors or whether or not you're looking at it for yourself as an organization. There is the ability now to develop innovative services that break expectation. I mean, I did a presentation end of last year with New Voice Media, and Dennis Foy announced to the audience that using this sort of approach, we could be looking at the end of IVR, not the end of the need for organizing a way to prioritize customers, but using this approach, you could find a much more elegant solution to that. And I think some of the established ways that we have always done things in contact centers are now at the point of being increasingly challenged. Vendors that are in the right place can do that, but I think what's also exciting is that really confident brands that have organized themselves, ones that really recognize service is a place to be different, will also start adopting that and building their own unique approaches to life. And again, I can see this has been a very large scale trend in the way that the AI was, one that we can revisit year on year, but I think this year marks the official beginning of that approach.
I love the example of Lego bricks, because in exactly that way, there are vendors out there who can provide you the bricks with an instruction of how to build it into a predefined model. So we can have a packaged solution that looks like X, or you can do your own thing with it, or you can buy multiple different packs and put it all together, and it fits exactly like with the API instruction. You know, that's exactly what we've been seeing with people out in the industry. People want to either have the choice of something prepackaged, or I'm going to have the right people in my organization to now take that much further and start plugging different things into it. What you mentioned about Dennis, talking about trying to replace the need for people to go through an IVR, it's something that has been kind of on the peripheral for a few years, and it's something that we've seen, especially in Europe. There was a big push in Europe to say, I don't want people to have to go through these menu tone systems. And this change in technology is what's really going to enable people to do that.
So I think it's a watch this space. I think it's ripe for innovation.
I think it's a very exciting piece to keep an eye on.
And what leads from that, by the way, is to say that obviously that ain't going to invent itself in the cupboard. It's not that intelligent.
That would be wonderful.
It would be wonderful, but it needs people to build it. And I think new skills and new relationships are needed for this. So the first point I would make is, and I haven't explicitly mentioned it, but customer journeys are still absolutely vital for all of us. The skill I think we need to bring into there, particularly is service design. There's not enough time really to talk about it today, but for me, it really is the thing that makes everything sing. All the great presentations and awards and judging that I've done in 2018 has had a very strong service design component in it. I've seen certain senior teams who I consider to be the leading edge always have a service design capability sat around the table. You know, half a dozen people representing different things. Service design, absolutely vital. Here's the manifestation. It happens to be the Metro Bank, but it's a theme that you'll see over and over again from the top brands, which is that, you know, a common experience, a designed experience is not by accident, it's deliberate. And notice where the contact center sits there. It sits across the whole of the experience. It's part of the whole experience. And again, that's deliberate through these kinds of skills. So service design, very much important. And then building on that idea, there are other things coming to the fore as well. Some people will be into their DevOps mantra. If that's a little bit too rich for you, you've probably come across Agile. You're probably trying to escape waterfall, all that good stuff. And what we're really saying is that we see a world in which, you know, you're not going to do any design these days without some degree of code. So therefore, you've got development people in there, you've got people who operationalize that, you know, they take it to market. And then there's people who we would traditionally say are people within the service world. And Nick over at Sky Gaming, I've heard him talk now for a couple of years, and he's a real thought leader for me on this particular point, making the point that he's seeing a synthesis and a new set of team coming through of traditional service capability, coding capability, design capability. And again, that's the kind of skill and cross-functional teamwork you're going to need to deliver what we just talked about earlier on.
And the example that you gave of Metro Bank is the contact center being part of the customer experience. That's the change that we've been waiting to see, where now the whole of the business is actually responsible for that customer journey. It's not just left to the contact center to own and effectively pick up the pieces where those other elements are failing.
Yeah. So again, expect to see in the leading examples out there a new mix of people working on those particular things. Keeping on the people theme, let's talk about diversification of how we get access to expertise. Home working, depends what part of the world you're in. For some people, it's well established. UK is actually a little bit slow. Other markets have really gotten to grips, but there's, you know, cloud has enabled us to have people be anywhere, basically, is the message, whether or not it's within other offices virtually, or indeed it's home working and the release of new skill as a result of creating people, giving people new options in terms of how they can participate with us. That's an area. There's an area I learned this year, again, which is coming out of the gig economy philosophy of those people that like to work with the freedom that's embedded within that particular way of working. And again, there are now organizations that are specifically attracting gig workers to be trained up and work alongside the more traditional workforce to deliver customer service outcomes. And again, I've seen that at very large scale, global customer service businesses, brands that we all know and love. But it's certainly a theme that I'm beginning to see more and more. And here's a reinvention of an old one. It didn't quite work 10 years ago, but again, if we are increasingly using collaboration and unified communication tools across the business, there is a bigger argument to say some of those people can be brought into live customer service resolution. I don't pretend that it's logistically easy to do, but if you can, you get a much richer mix, all of which drives to better customer service, lower cost, etc., etc. So I think, again, the way in which we build out our capability for the live advisor channel, there are some interesting trends afoot as far as that's concerned.
And I think certainly one of the things where Europe, I think, is behind the US, is certainly in the use of home workers. The whole pool of home workers is very much more advanced in the US. Yeah. And it's a pool of workers that we don't normally assume. Often people who've been carers or brought up a family never thought they'd work in a contact center and are looking for sort of flexibility in their life. And that's a big new pool of people, as you say, Martin. And I think that's much more widespread on the other side of the Atlantic. Yeah.
Stuff to research, stuff to get in touch with. I think that's important.
Historically, some of the delays and the problems with wanting to do this was technology.
Yeah.
And actually, that's one of the the happy accidents that you get with cloud is the fact that the technology is no longer a worry. So actually now let's focus on experience. Let's focus on employee. And like you said, there are hurdles to get over, but they're no longer at technology level.
Yeah. So on the people front, again, theme for me. Less command control, which is unfortunately still fairly prevalent in a world where we're terrified of cost and therefore we try to control everything to the nth degree, and more empowerment. It stands to reason, given what we've said everything to date, that the quality of the people we will be using for the remaining live engagement are of a higher type and require a certain culture.
There'll be a number of resource planning and real-time teams out there that are potentially called the command center, the control center, or command and control, because it was exactly that. We go back to 5-6 years ago, that was the focus. It was on cost. It was on making sure that there was a lot more control over it. So I love the idea that we're moving away from that to people, to emotion, to customer.
We are getting there. So first and foremost, scores on the doors aren't as good as they need to be on this whole business of employee engagement. I did actually see another survey yesterday, to be honest, focused just on the call center, where the numbers were much higher than that. So it would be nice to think that we're scoring higher than on average. But the chemistry is an important one. The strategy around of it needs to be developed, and people need to be buying in the fact that engaged employees delivers numbers at the end of the day. Go through that particular logic. Here's one I just wanted to put into this piece, and that is the difference, the expectation that an increasing number of people have got around of being coached and developed and whatever. And the reason I've got my little icon there for continuous learning, and notice it's mobile continuous learning, is that there are new learning strategies that are coming in that the contact center really ought to be using, and that we should be absolutely leaving the idea that we only ever are invested in once, which is called a 6-week process called induction, and you spend 23 years and you don't receive any further a thing apart from quality assessments. I slightly lampoon that point, but we need to embed that in and make that a possibility for people.
This links back obviously to where you started with AI and coaching and development. The ability to be assessing more contacts without actually putting effort into it. If your QM team isn't sat there listening to phone calls, your QM team can be out there actually with the people going through and saying, okay, here is how to improve.
And this last area, this is a Waitrose one. This is an award-winning thing from an employee engagement sort of award thing. The psychology of getting people to be focused upon their personal best rather than winner takes all, and that kind of positive gamification that we can get going. And again, the idea that customer service is a place where excellence absolutely has to be the benchmark, everybody has to get behind that, and everybody is pursuing that at an individual level. How are you developing those kind of strategies to motivate your kind of people? And then finally, there is some industry recognition of the fact that quality monitoring fits within quality management. The bigger picture has traditionally been called optimization. I chaired a conversation last year where the word engagement has now turned up. So some of the hipsters out there are re-nudging it into engagement. Now, is that just self-service shifts? I think that's the least of it, but that's to be most welcomed. But it's really a much broader, deeper philosophy that, gosh, the people at the front line are just as smart as you and I, and they have humanity through the center of the stick as far as their being is concerned. We need to treat people differently as far as call centers are concerned. And at last we're beginning to see some technology solutions starting to acknowledge and reflect that point too. I've got to keep going because I'm mindful of time here. That also then comes for me to moving away from a top-down, internally focused, regulatorily obsessed view of quality.
Yep.
And again, I'm still active in this particular conversation with people, but I do think that we took a wrong turn a while back, thinking that product-orientated quality was the way to go. But unfortunately, it doesn't really fit in a service context, because guess what? It's as diverse as there are numbers of customers, and we don't have processes that allow us to recognize the difference that journeys sometimes put upon what an outcome looks like, and indeed the expectations that 5 generations of customers give us. And we've often confused that and tried to get a conformance coming through. So as a conversation piece, I think it's time for us to rethink quality as being just simply an expected standard, whatever that is. As far as the customer is concerned, that expectation is I got what I came for, and notice the nudge that just functional delivery is no longer adequate. Emotion matters. Organizations need to be looking at their own ability to respond to customers, because you're certainly not going to be in business if you don't do that. And as a 2-second soapbox, most of us have got it wrong on the regulator. It's not about reading stuff out. It's about actually discovering what the regulator thinks is important, which is simply making sure that customers understood what they bought, which is not the same as what most people are focused on. And that is how you then blend a much more outside-in version of quality. And again, although it's not hugely uber new as a topic, it is vital as a cultural foundation to have an outside-in version of quality and align it with customer experience. And at that particular point, I will give everyone a chance to have a breather and add some more thoughts in for themselves.
Okay, let's just have a brief look at a couple of predictions that have come in. Quite an interesting one here from Dave, who says the contact center roles won't go away. They'll just shift to support business continuity to enable seamless self-serve and automated omni-channel customer journey, which I think ties in with your escalation channel, if you like, behind self-serve there. Thomas has said, with the increasing popularity and capability of virtual assistants, in 10 years' time or maybe less, customers won't be the ones talking to contact centers. The virtual assistants will. A world where virtual assistants talk to virtual assistants. Just look at what Google have already achieved in 2018 by calling restaurants. Quite an interesting approach.
Yeah, very interesting stuff going on with diary booking for those exact reasons. So you can have bots that talk to each other through emails that look at your calendar and make arrangements. If I want to have a meeting with Martin, my calendar bot can talk to your calendar bot, find a time we're both available and arrange it. So it's absolutely starting to happen.
And finally, Susie says, I think more companies will focus on identifying, retaining unhappy customers through customer feedback and follow-up. So just a range of different opinions. Martin, we've got a short amount of time, so let's do your last two.
I'm going to race through. Thank you very much. So next one, well, guess what we've got?
Excellent.
The balance between the two worlds. This is the big conversation. I hope you're all going to have this year, which is what's the balance going to be between how we automate and how we use humans. It's an ever-shifting pattern. I think it needs a continuous debate to get that balance, and I think success is predicated upon getting that balance. On one side of the equation is the human, and I think the center of CX is all about emotion, and it's not actually what you do, it's the way you make me feel that I retain most in terms of memory. And so therefore, very quickly, I think we're moving into a world where in contact center terms, we're going to have to get used to either amplifying when it's positive or transforming appropriately when it's negative. And this is part of a broader conversation that actually myself and Hannah are going to have another webinar on soon this month, talking about how in contact centers we should be up-resing the skill to all and every time notice a negative emotional state and be able to transition it to an appropriately positive one at the end of the day. Why bother? Well, the answer lies in research, which says positive emotions drive people more towards brands, negatives drive them away from brands. In other words, that's the beginnings of the CX value proposition, which is I will stay with you longer, buy more over time, and tell other people. And if you're not actually delivering positive emotional outcomes based on a thing called the peak end rule, which we'll talk about later in this other seminar, you ain't hacking it. So the point we're making here is you've got some individuals who are probably doing this very well. I think as a leadership group, you now need to make sure you're doing that each and every interaction, because you're either building or detracting from that goodwill bank. So that's the big deal as far as the emotion stuff is concerned. And then finally, because I know we're getting to the top of the hour, I think my last prediction is that some of people will just not be doing any of this because you're already preoccupied with other urgencies, and therefore as a result of it, it will all pass you by and it will not be noticed. And I thought I would make that just my joker in the pack, if you want, as far as that's concerned.
I think it's nice to actually acknowledge that whilst there are lots of things that people could be doing, whilst there's lots of new technology available, there's lots of new customer experience methodologies being discussed, there is still a day job that people are doing, there is still customers that they are supporting, there are still contact centers that are being managed, and people may not get around to that. And that's okay. It's not a case of saying, well, if you're not doing these things,
yes, you can get 12 or 18 months behind, but not too far. Okay, that's it really, Jonty. So that's the top 9 and a bit for the year.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that. Just a quick question to you in the audience. If you would like to see a demonstration of the new voice media solutions, particularly things like the conversation analyzer, if you'd just like to pop yes in the box there, would be good to see. And then let's go and have a look now at some of the predictions that people have been making. So the first one comes in from Griselda, who said that live chat will increase dramatically with a heavier emphasis on things such as Facebook messaging, which I think will grow things. So perhaps rather than a live chat as a separate window, it might well come through a messaging channel.
We've seen people doing that. We've seen it start to take up. Obviously, it's dependent on how positively looked at Facebook might be in the future. But those, I think it kind of covers. It's the in-app messaging service of the application that you're already using.
I mean, Neris makes a point.
RCS is likely to take off. We've got Andrea who says messages or updates on services can be sent as a pop message on your TV, routed by Alexa or another Internet of Things device like Instant Messenger. I think is quite an interesting one. Neris has said the industry will collectively rebrand the contact center and start using the customer engagement department or the customer service team to better reflect the profile and importance the value team brings to a business. Perhaps John should change call center helper to customer engagement helper.
Are you brave enough for that, John?
That's an interesting one. David says voice recognition will continue to become more sophisticated and aligned with artificial intelligence. Call routing would become much more effective. I think we expect to see there. And Jamie said chatbots and AI in Facebook Messenger and WhatsApp will become more popular than in web chat. So that's also a prediction of the way that that messaging apps are likely to be.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, I like to think about it in much more simple terms of modalities. You know, text is text at the end of the day. And it's simply whatever you choose as a customer, your entry point, but after that, it's live text, you know? And Neris makes a point earlier on, you know, that we've got to get our head around the fact that it's all about the seamlessness of swapping that, of being able to do it in any old way. So the delivery of the experience is one single conversation. you know, however it actually moves across. And the thing we've got to do is move across these tram lines without disrupting things and without having to begin again. Hence the point about, you know, ecosystems, infrastructures, and actually deliberately designing it as such. We have a tendency of doing short, sharp interventions, which often result in further fragmentation. So a lot of the things and the problems we face are actually to do with the way we design our projects going forward. And even though we don't have the money to do it all in one go, I believe that we can always have a joined up view of what we're trying to build, so you don't end up with further fragmentation.
Moving away from just...
So here's a question from Senga, who says, it was great to hear Martin include escalations. And I think that's certainly one that's resonated with the audience. Working in the utility industry, this is something we're always mindful of, but the difficulty is customers tend to panic and contact us on every channel possible. Have you any suggestions as how we can manage this? You know, one customer, multiple responses?
Well, you know, if you're in industries where disaster is a fact of life, you know, natural disasters, there's water coming through the thing, there's all sorts of terrible stuff. I think you have to start with a philosophy of being proactive. So, you know, using social, particularly to proactively, and using geo-targeting to get messages out very quickly and super saturate people as far as that's concerned. And then try to listen actively when live inbound comes, understand that, and again transform that into proactive. You know, those are the kinds of things. And when you've got long queues which require humans, that's the wrong end of it. That's where you've run out of options, and that's where people get very upset. So I do think that one thing that utility companies and travel companies, you know, airlines still make a mistake. You should be scenario planning about what should you be doing when those things go wrong, yes, and have a very deliberate strategy around that. We still get to airports where things go wrong. The last one was drones, and guess what? I bet nobody said anything to anybody for ages, you know, and it's still the same old, and it's the same problem we have with utility companies when things go wrong. What is your communication strategy in those situations? And queues and live humans is the place of last resort. So that would be my answer to that one, Senga.
I think if you look at what they've been asking is about, you've got customers using every single channel. And I think probably the problem that might be experienced here is if a customer is tweeting, plus texting, plus going online and emailing, actually they end up getting 3 different responses, one from each channel. And that's because you look at the number of siloed siloed channels, they're not integrated. Whereas if you have one place where all of those kind of voice of the customer is coming through. So if I look at it, I get a tweet and I look at that customer account, I can now see they've also emailed and they've also called and they've also tried to use web chat in the last 15 minutes. So when I'm going to go back to that customer, I can acknowledge all of those attempts.
Yeah. That's one part. I think the essence of the question you were asking there is how come you've got to preempt people trying to just do multiple escalations to get attention. So it's got to be proactive. Yeah. Anyway, next one.
Okay, so here's an interesting question by Shashank. Will WFM tools be a bottleneck to ops, or will they eventually run on autopilot mode to predict and schedule agents?
Well, you picked it up earlier, and actually it was talking about smarter resourcing models, and it's something that people have been looking at, and we do hear about coming, which is you have schedules which are going to be created, but then you will end up getting real-time adaptations to those schedules automated through AI, through algorithms that are looking at the call volumes, that are looking at the behaviors that we've got. So if people are coming back late from lunch breaks, it will automatically be moving things around. So along with everything else, the technology out there is starting to become so flexible that those small tasks of having to have a team of people staring at a screen, checking what people are doing and moving stuff around, that will be removed. So now what you can start thinking about is how to improve that agent experience of being on those phones.
So you don't need people to spot the things going wrong. You'll see alerts coming up. Absolutely obvious things will be automated in terms of decisioning. You will then have proactive alerts saying you could do this or that, what do you want? So human in the loop decisioning then says, I prefer to do this rather than that. And then the system will have learned from that. So over time, again, some of that gets taken across to automation the next time round. But it will become increasingly easier in that scenario. And by the way, I do think it still favors larger scale volume because that is still the nature of machine learning in terms of its ability. So the largest centers will probably find WFM working slightly better for them at this point in time.
I think they do already, of course. When you start talking about larger numbers of call volumes coming in, it means obviously you can get those economies of scale.
All the more reason to leave spreadsheets eventually.
Of course.
Indeed. The top of the hour now, so I'd just like to ask the question of you, what did you like best about today's webinar? If you'd like to put that into the chat room. So today's winning tip or prediction comes in from Andrea, who says the number of businesses operating 24/7, 365 will increase over the next couple of years, not just self-service access. So I guess this ties in, Martin, about the escalation, that as self-service becomes more 24 hours, so will the need for an escalation channel.
We need it now. We need it now. Yes, good one. Worthy winner. Indeed.
If you'd like to fill in the survey before you leave, and just a reminder, if you'd like to share today's predictions with your management team or the rest of your team, you'll be able to do that with the recording. Will be available in just about an hour's time. We're going to be back next week looking at how to knock 20 seconds off your average handling time. And I'd just like to thank our two speakers, Martin Hill-Wilson, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
And Phil, thank you for joining us for your first webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John T.
And thank you to everyone in the audience. And thank you for joining us in 2019, and look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.